Good morning, afternoon, or evening uh, to you, depending on where you are. So I'm Harris, an academic fellow from University of Malaysia, Terengganu, Malaysia, and I'm currently doing my PhD at the University of Queensland, Australia. So first of all, I would like to thank the World Seagrass Association, particularly Dr. Jillian Uy, my master's supervisor, and Yimei and Maru for the invitation to give a talk to this seminar. And thanks everyone for tuning in. So today I'm going to share some of the work I did for my master's thesis, which is largely about the spatial feeding ecology of dugongs in Malaysia. So the cover picture you're seeing here is my study site, uh, the Sibu Archipelago. So it is one of the few and most important habitats for dugongs, and also many seagrass-associated organisms in Malaysia and the broader Southeast Asia region. So the main reason is that this group of islands hosts a large intertropical seagrass meadow, and most of the meadow is subtidal, meaning it stays submerged regardless of the tides. And on top of that, the seawater is quite turbid. As you can see from the picture, you can barely see the bottom. So what this means is that these seagrasses are hidden in plain sight, just like in this picture. It looks like nothing's there, but in reality, there's a large seagrass meadow underneath, which is home to an astounding array of ocean life and providing a whole suite of ecosystem services. So my master's project was built on work that my master supervisor, Dr. Jillian, and my mentor, Mr. Afendi Yang Amri from Universiti Malaya, started all the way back in 2005. So back then, dugongs were thought to be locally extinct in Johor waters, which is here. So with support from the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, they conducted surveys to find out whether dugongs were still present and where the seagrass beds were. And what they discovered was that waters around this particular area, the Sibu-Tinggi Archipelago, still had dugongs, and feeding trails were observed within the meadow. So the good news is the dugongs didn't leave. They were just keeping a very low profile, just like the seagrass. Then in the 2010s, Dr. Gillen produced the very first fine-scale seagrass map for Tinggi Island. So one of the main islands of the Sibu-Tinggi Archipelago. The seagrass beds over there are also mainly subtidal. And at the time, they used an underwater towed video method to map the seagrass to provide a clear understanding of the ecological patterns and the ecological drivers of the seagrass spatial structure. And following that, Dr. Louisa Ponampalam, who was my co-supervisor at that time, conducted systematic area surveys across several main islands in Johor to look for dugongs. And their results corroborated earlier evidence that dugongs are indeed frequently sighted around Sibu and Tinggi Islands. So by 2016, when I joined Dr. Gillian's lab at University Malaya as a research assistant, there were still so many questions left unanswered. So we were well aware that a population of dugongs was residing in Johor, and that this archipelago was an important dugong habitat. But what we didn't know was how large the meadow was, what the seagrass community structure looked like, where and how dugongs were using the meadows for feeding, and what factors were driving those habitat use patterns. So my master's thesis aimed to answer three main questions. First, how is the seagrass distributed? Second, where and how do dugongs feed? Do they feed across the whole meadow or only in certain parts? And lastly, because dugongs have been observed to exhibit different feeding behaviors in different locations, so we asked, what factors drive the feeding preferences of dugongs in the area? For today's seminar, I will be focusing on just the first two. This is our research team, which comprise of researchers from the Team Sea Habitat, Spatial Ecology Lab at Universiti Malaya, and MareCet, a marine mammal focused NGO in Malaysia. So Dr. Gillian and Dr. Louisa were my advisors at the time, and we had Mr. Effendi, Mr. Ki Alfian, myself as the student lead, and Miss Jordan. So to understand the spatial temporal distribution of seagrass habitats in the Sibu Archipelago, we applied the same method that Dr. Gillian used for Tinggi Island. So the underwater towed video method. So and in fact, it was exactly the same camera system she used. So essentially, it's a camera in a waterproof casing mounted on a glider frame, and then we pull behind the boat at a constant speed along fixed transects. Whenever I describe this to people, they will assume that it was a one-man job. Like, like they will ask like, how hard can it be to hold a rope with a camera on the end, right? But trust me, it is definitely not that simple. As you can see from the picture, we had 4 people just to keep the system running properly. And it required constant coordination between the people who are managing the equipment and the boat skipper. And we repeated this across 3 seasons, the pre-monsoon, inter-monsoon, and post-monsoon seasons. And after the field surveys, we reviewed all the video footage, and this is what it looks like. So it's in loop now, but did you see the feeding trails?
Yeah, it's just those lines, right? Like you can see.
Yeah, exactly. You see those bare like winding bare trails. Those are the dugong feeding trails. So uh the videos serve as a permanent record of the benthic habitat along the transects. So we can see like seagrass, macroalgae, feeding trails, macrofauna like sea stars, sea cucumbers, and sometimes even we have like occasional sea turtle making a cameo. So uh, we subsample the data at every 5-meter interval. And the key information we extracted was seagrass percentage cover, the presence or absence of dugong feeding trails, and the number of feeding trails per image. We then conducted spatial analysis to determine the extent of the meadow, to know the size of the meadow and the distribution of seagrass within it through interpolation. So in every season, we covered approximately 22 kilometers of transect lines and collected around 3,500 images. And seagrass was present in 54 to 88% of the total images per season, with 4 main species recorded: Halophila uninervis and Halophila ovalis as dominant species, followed by Oceana cerulata and Syringodium isoetifolium. And our results show that the seagrass meadow in the Sibu Archipelago is as large as 12.88 square kilometers, or about 1,300 hectares. So from the records, we found that this meadow is by far the single largest seagrass meadow in Malaysia that also has confirmed dugong occurrences. And seagrass meadows in other states of Peninsular Malaysia are considerably smaller, mostly less than 1 square kilometers. But of course, there are still many meadows and patches that are yet to be mapped. but the sheer size of this meadow is significant, especially given the presence of a resident dugong population over there. And our meadow size is comparable to those in Thailand and India, which support small dugong populations of less than 150 individuals, though it is much smaller than the meadows in Australia and the UAE, which supports thousands of dugongs. So even though this habitat is not quite, in dugong mega city territory yet, but it is certainly on the map. And across the northeast monsoon period, the size of the meadow decreased by almost 25% from inter-monsoon to post-monsoon. Then, so during the inter-monsoon, seagrass coverage was at its highest, with a mode value of 76 to 100%. Then it dropped to 26 to 50% during the pre-monsoon season. And by the time it got to post-monsoon, the mode coverage was only 0 to 5%. So from the maps, we can see that the most affected regions were the northern and southern edges, where seagrass cover became considerably lower, indicated by those dark blue color zones, while the interior of the meadow maintained relatively higher cover. So this interior zone may serve as the recovery area for the entire meadow. And we speculated that this seasonal change was driven by the northeast monsoon from November to March, where rough sea conditions reduce the light reaching the plants and may have caused broad-scale sediment burial. So this shows that the meadow is exposed to a steep gradient of change within a single year. But however, because as it is dominated largely by colonizing species, the Halophila ovalis and Haloduli uninervis, it recovers quite rapidly. So quite resilient, right? So the question now becomes, how does this high degree of change in seagrass meadows affect where dugongs can actually find food? So from using the same video data, we counted the number of dugong feeding trails to obtain their frequency per image. So for the analysis, we use Moran's eye autocorrelation index to detect the spatial structure of the feeding trail distribution. And then we ran hotspot analysis using Gertis odds statistics to identify the locations of those spatial clusters. So feeding trails were present in 49 to 70% of the total images in every season. And the total number of feeding trails range from around 2005 to 9,000. And the feeding trail density range from 1 to 3 trails per image. So this reaffirms that this seagrass meadow is a highly utilized dugong habitat, so further highlighting its ecological importance. And we found that these dugongs actually fed in clustered patterns across all 3 seasons. So we obtained positive Moran's eye values with p-values below 0.01, indicating that feeding trails were not randomly distributed, but spatially clustered. And the feeding hotspots, those are shown in red, were consistently located in the middle section of the meadow across all seasons, despite the meadow, the overall shrinkage of the meadow over time. And you can also see that the cold spots in blue color, they were mostly at the edges. And interestingly, it appeared that dugongs were feeding according to seagrass coverage. We found that seagrass cover in the feeding hotspots was significantly higher than in the cold spots and non-significant spots. So this indicates that intensive grazing occurred in patches with the highest food resources. So basically the dugongs know where the good restaurants are, and they chose to eat more over there. So there are two inferences. First, the higher seagrass cover promotes dugong feeding. So where dugongs graze intensively in areas with higher coverage. And second, that dugong feeding itself promotes higher seagrass cover, resulting from the cultivation behavior where dugongs actively maintain higher quality patches. So this is a behavior previously observed by Prin et al. And De Jong et al. In Australia, as well as in Indonesia. So either way, these findings suggest that dugongs fit strategically within the meadow rather than wandering around randomly hoping for the best. Yeah. So while we have established that seagrass cover is critical to grazing intensity, how exactly does this strategy work? So we found that dugongs appeared to shift their grazing patterns in response to the changes in seagrass availability. So if we look at these histograms, the three histograms on the left show the frequency of feeding trails per image, while the histograms on the right show the frequency of seagrass coverage category. So during the intermonsoon, when most of the meadow had high cover, so around between 76 to 100%, we mostly recorded 1 to 2 feeding trails per image. While during the post-monsoon, when the seagrass coverage had dropped to just like 0 to 5%, the count was similarly low at 1 to 2 trails per image. And by examining the association between these two variables alongside the autocorrelogram, we detected two distinct feeding trail occurrence patterns. So in both high and low seagrass cover seasons, dugongs appeared to feed in a dispersed manner. So the feeding trails were further apart from one another. And the autocorrelated distance is up to 1.1 kilometers, so resulting in larger feeding patches. And in contrast, during the pre-monsoon season, where seagrass cover was mainly at a moderate level of 26 to 50%, we recorded 4 to 5 feeding trails per image, mostly. So here we detected a different pattern. Dugongs fed in a more concentrated manner. So feeding trails were distributed much closer together, meaning individuals were moving between feeding patches in a much tighter space. And the autocorrelated distance was considerably smaller at 662 meters, so smaller, more compact feeding patches. And we considered some of the possible trade-offs that dugongs must navigate when selecting feeding patches in habitat with heterogeneous food availability. So in high seagrass cover meadows, the abundance of food may give dugongs the luxury of being selective, moving larger distances between feeding stations to seek out higher quality patches while still maintaining a sufficient intake rate. That's all right to them. And well, on the other hand, when food availability is very limited, as indicated by low seagrass cover, dugongs may no longer have the option of being picky. So when almost every patch is equally poor, they may not make selection between patches for quality food because continued exploration in search of something better may impose higher foraging costs and may compromise their ability to meet the minimum energy requirement. It's just like, it's just like us wandering around a half-empty fridge and eventually just settling on for whatever's there. Yeah. And meanwhile, for pre-monsoon season, so that's when the seagrass cover was moderate. So dugongs fed in a more intensive and concentrated manner. So this could be because the profitable patches, the better patches, were distributed further apart in space with more empty gaps between them. So in that case, it becomes less advantageous for dugongs to travel great distances in search of preferred food. So what's the better strategy here? So maybe it's just to stay put and make the most of what's in front of you. So to wrap up, our study has addressed several of the key questions we set out to answer in understanding dugong spatial feeding ecology. So including first, the spatial temporal distribution of seagrass in the Sibu Archipelago, the spatial grazing patterns of dugongs, the key habitats for dugong feeding, and insights into dugong feeding behavior and its driving factors. And what remains to be fully understood is what precisely drives seagrass change and how that in turn shapes dugong feeding behavior. And in the final chapter of my master's thesis, we actually ran some field experiments to investigate the drivers of dugong feeding preferences. But we will save that for next time, okay? And as we all know that dugongs are key ecosystem engineers in seagrass ecosystems. So in areas where dugong population exists, the conservation of seagrass and dugongs must always go hand in hand. So, but that said, monitoring dugong habitat in deep, turbid waters demands extra efforts and right tools. So I would strongly encourage all seagrass and dugong ecologists, as well as habitat managers, to consider adopting the toad video method I described today. It is non-invasive, which I personally appreciate. It's reproducible. And most importantly, it collects spatially explicit data that can meaningfully support the conservation and management of both the species and the habitat. And I would like to take a moment to thank someone, because without him, this work would not have been possible. So, sorry. So he's Gary Kendrick, who I'm sure needs no introduction in the seagrass community. So Gary generously lent us his toad video system. And for that, we are super grateful. Yeah. So Gary, I hope that you are fully enjoying your retirement, and hopefully you got a lot of seagrass swims. And if you would like to learn more about the study, this paper is published in Estuarine, Coastal and Shelf Science, so feel free to check it out. And before I end, I just wanted to say that the implications of this study actually go beyond filling just knowledge gaps. Of course, the spatial data helps highlight the status of this habitat in a meaningful way. So for example, the study area is now, the Sibu-Tinggi Archipelago is now recognized as one of the important marine mammal areas, with the dugong as the qualifying species. So fast forward to today, as for what I'm up to now, as I mentioned, I'm currently doing my PhD in Brisbane. My current work focuses on developing effective conservation strategies to address the challenges of monitoring elusive seagrass megafauna, including dugongs and green turtles, using eDNA, environmental DNA, and drone techniques. And both are also non-invasive methods with wide applicability, so particularly well suited for habitats that are challenging to access than others. So with that, I would like to thank all the funders, institutions, and individuals who have supported this study in one way or another. Thank you. And yeah, welcome for any questions that you have.
Thanks, Harris. It's very, very interesting.
Thank
Congratulations for a
you.
nice thesis also. Are
Thank
there any
you.
questions? Feel free to open your microphone. Otherwise, I can also check the chat. So we have one question in the chat from Adrian. Um, Thank you so much, Harris. What depth does seagrass go down to in this region? Yeah.
What depth, right?
Yeah.
The depth ranges from mainly 3 to 10 meters deep for where the seagrass meadows are. Yeah, so it's actually not too deep.
Is there any other question? I actually have one question.
Oh, sure.
um, so with this method, after you have taken the videos, and when you're like doing these like maps and classification, um, are you using any particular software? Do you think it's like easy to apply for managing agencies, for example, or does it need like technical expertise?
Mm, yeah, actually, I mainly use GIS software like QGIS, and because especially because QGIS is free, right? So as a student, as a master student back then, QGIS is super helpful, and I still believe that they are very helpful nowadays. And so I ran most of my spatial. I mapped the seagrass in QGIS, and but I also ran some spatial analysis like the Moran's Eye and Gertis Odd Statistics using Geoda software, which is also free. Also a freely available software that I think would be useful for students or for researchers who have limited as resources.
And is there any way to like make it automatized, or did you have to spend many hours checking videos yourself?
Reviewing the videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, back then I reviewed everything manually. But yeah, I'm sure nowadays if you are I mean there are so many smart people, right? So you can try to automate the process by using AI or things. And I also believe that nowadays the camera system is much better, so you can have higher definition footage compared to what I had last time. So with that, it's pretty much it wouldn't be too hard for the machine to actually recognize the feeding trails or to estimate the density of the seagrass from the footage. Then yeah, just like
Yeah,
how
because was
people
it
used to estimate.
mhm. Was it a GoPro? I think that was there.
The one that I use is not it's actually a
Okay.
digital camera that is already encased in a housing. But
Okay.
I still put the GoPro up there just to, just to capture something else. Yeah. But the main video that we analyzed was from the digital camera in the waterproof case. Yeah.
All right. All right.
Yeah. As you
We
can
have,
see from the one I showed, right, the quality isn't that great. That's because it's quite an old system, but it's sufficient enough for us to actually got the information we wanted, like to calculate the seagrass coverage, to identify the feeding trails, and to calculate the number of feeding trails.
yeah. I guess like especially with species that are very different morphologically is like good enough, right, to identify.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. We're getting some questions here in the chat. Let me read them. So from Adrian, have you had any issues with remote sensing with seagrass?
Remote sensing as in using this method or using other methods,
Probably, Adrian, feel free
like
to.
satellite uh images. Sorry, Adrian, if you could explain further for my
Uh,
PhD. Ah, okay. No, no, no. Well, so the the underwater toad video methods that I used that I presented earlier, it was for my master's. Uh, so the if you were referring to that one, I would say the difficulties would be during the sampling, during the survey process, it's actually
Good question. He needed some time to reply. No. Perfect. I think you are muted, but yeah.
sorry, I'm back. I got kicked out.
It's okay. We were probably you needed some like time to think about the question.
Okay.
But now we hear you. So
Okay. Where did you lose me? Have I answered the question?
I think you were finishing,
Okay, okay,
but
all
feel
right.
free to like do. I think you can reply to the
All
question
right,
again.
yeah, yeah. So Adrian, so for the underwater toad video methods, I the technical part we didn't actually have much problem. But of course, we have to fix some of the we have to maybe make sure that it's everything is installed properly from one season to another when we use it. So that's one of the technical issues that we encountered back then. Uh, but other than that, not really, yeah, yeah. I would say the difficulties were on something else, like we need a lot of manpower. Uh, and oh yeah, actually the system itself has a real time feed on the boat. Like we have a monitor on the boat to see what's the camera is recording, like live. So that one we had some problem with the cable that time. So I think that's a bit risky because without the live feed, it's easier for you to raise your camera from being bumped into certain obstacles, right? You have to make sure that you can see where the cameras are at the time, so that it won't hit like a certain rock, corals, or even just the bottom. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. I mean, yeah, Adrian. Feel free to just tell me if yeah.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat. I will read it unless Sirius, I don't know if you want to ask the question, otherwise I can read it. All right, I can read it. I was wondering if the seagrass meadows which you addressed are HO and HU dominated. Is this characteristic throughout feeding sites for dugongs, and are there any reasons why?
Hi, Sirius. uh, yes, the Seagrass meadows are mainly dominated by Halophila ovalis and Halodulina nervis. But there are also some areas that have more some patches that have more Oceana cerulata and Syringodium isoetifolium. But I would say, generally speaking, it's dominated by these two colonizing species. Uh, and we found that in non-feeding areas of dugongs where we didn't see feeding shows, any feeding shows, there are more the Oceana cerulata and Syringodium isoetifolium in terms of ratio compared to the HO and HU. So they are all generally just there, just which one is more. Are there any reasons why? Yeah, good question. The thing is, it if not mistaken, when I surveyed the meadow back in 2016 all the way to 2019, it changed quite a lot from back in 2005, where so in terms of ratio of the seagrass community. So my speculation was because of the dugongs and also the sea turtles over there, that actually, due to the intensive grazing, they actually promote the colonization of the fast growing species. Yeah. So somehow this has become a meadow that is easily being wiped off because there are the colonizing species are weak, right? They have very weak clonal support, but they also recover very easily. Uh, so the seasonal changes that we saw earlier, uh, due to the monsoon, is probably a natural cycle, but we're not sure yet. Uh, but so far, I like 2 years in 2024, I went back to the same site, and the seagrass meadows are still doing very, very healthy. So, and it also still exhibit the same kind of seasonal changes that I described earlier. So, but definitely, I think we need to like replicate the same methods to see to really tell the trends. Yeah.
There's more questions in the chat. Do you think their feeding habits are also influenced by their reproductive time? And it's
Ah.
related to the dugongs.
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's really an interesting question to explore because we never actually uh, know their reproductive cycle over there. This is mainly due to the very limited research on dugongs in Malaysia, generally speaking. We have been trying to document their spatial distribution, their even just the population status. If it's not really, we haven't even confirmed how big is the population size. Like, yeah. So in terms of this, I think this is a very interesting question to ask later on, once we know once we have more information about their reproductive cycles. Yeah, it would be really interesting to see if the feeding habits change and how it interacts with the seagrass dynamics, right?